Some vows are made in moments of pain, but life has a beautiful way of breaking even the strongest walls when love comes dressed in innocence. After the tragic passing of his wife, the doctor's world collapsed in a way he could never have predicted. What had once been a life filled with warmth, laughter, and shared dreams suddenly turned cold, silent, and unbearably empty. His wife had not been just a partner. She had been his anchor, his balance, his quiet strength after long hospital shifts. Losing her didn't feel like losing a person. It felt like losing an entire part of himself. The house that once echoed with the sound of her humming now held only the soft cry of their daughter. Confused by an absence she was too young to understand. Overwhelmed by grief, guilt, and responsibilities he didn't know how to handle alone, the doctor made a vow, one born not out of anger, but out of deep, soul-crushing fear. He would never allow himself to love anyone again. Paragraph 2. Love, he reasoned, was a luxury he could no longer afford. Every memory of his wife reminded him of the cruelty of fate, how something so precious could be taken in an instant. He convinced himself that emotional distance was protection, not punishment. Nights were the worst, filled with the haunting if-onlys that grief forces upon the heart. If only he had been home sooner. If only he had insisted on a different treatment. If only he had held her longer the night before. These thoughts consumed him, and the more he tried to escape them, the more he wrapped himself in the belief that caring too deeply leads only to unbearable loss. In his pain, he concluded that shutting himself off from love was the only way to survive. Paragraph 3. His career became the place where he hid. At the hospital, surrounded by white coats, clinical routines, and patients who needed him, he found a way to distract himself from the storm inside. Work was predictable. Work was controlled. Work didn't ask him to open his heart, just his expertise. And so, he extended his shifts, volunteered for emergencies, and accepted every overnight duty. He told himself he was doing it for the sake of his daughter, providing for her future, focusing on what mattered. But deep down, he knew the truth. He didn't know how to be alone at home without the woman he loved. The hospital became a sanctuary where no one questioned why he never smiled anymore, why he walked with a straight back but lowered eyes, or why he kept conversations strictly professional. Paragraph 4. Meanwhile, his daughter became the silent witness to his emotional withdrawal. Though he cared for her with every ounce of responsibility he had, he struggled to show affection. He fed her, clothed her, took her to school, but the hugs were quick, the conversations short, and the moments of warmth scarce. Not because he didn't love her, but because he feared that giving her too much of what remained of his heart would make it even more fragile. He believed that shielding himself from emotional attachment was also a way of shielding her from the pain of losing another parent. What he didn't realize was that his silence was slowly teaching her to hide her own feelings too. Their home became a space where grief lived loudly, but love lived quietly. Paragraph 5. His vow of emotional isolation wasn't just about avoiding love from another woman. It extended to everyone. Friends stopped checking in regularly because he stopped answering. Family invitations went ignored. Even colleagues kept their distance, respecting the invisible wall he had carefully built around himself. To the outside world, he became the definition of strength, a dedicated doctor, a single parent, a man who handled tragedy with responsibility and grace. But inside, he was a man running from the possibility of feeling anything too deeply again. He knew that vulnerability was a door he could not afford to reopen, and so he locked it with determination and threw away the key. Paragraph 6. This emotional shutdown shaped every part of his life until one unexpected moment shattered the silence he had grown accustomed to, the sound of his daughter laughing with someone else. In that instant, he realized how much he had starved both himself and his child of the simple joy of connection. But this realization came later. Before that moment, his life was defined by the vow he had made in grief, a vow that dictated his decisions, his relationships, and the cold distance he kept from the world. He believed that living without love meant living without pain. But what he didn't yet understand was that emotional isolation is its own kind of suffering, one that slowly hardens the heart while pretending to protect it. Loss is never just an event. It is a wound that reshapes a person from the inside out. For the doctor, the death of his wife was not merely a heartbreak. It was a rupture in the foundation of his identity. He had been a husband, a partner, a man who built dreams with someone by his side. When she was gone, the life he knew vanished with her. Healing became necessary, but he never gave himself permission to begin. Instead of allowing himself to grieve openly, he buried every emotion beneath layers of duty and professionalism. He mistook silence for strength and numbness for resilience. What he didn't realize was that healing is not the absence of pain. It is the courage to face it. Paragraph 2. Healing after a profound loss often requires vulnerability, and vulnerability was the one thing he feared most. To heal meant to revisit the memories he had tried so desperately to avoid. The moments of laughter with his wife, the promises they made, the life they envisioned. Remembering those things was too painful because they highlighted everything he could no longer have. So he chose avoidance. He filled his days with endless work and his nights with exhaustion. But emotional wounds do not disappear simply because they are ignored. Like untreated injuries, they deepen, turning into invisible fractures that affect everything, from the way he looked at his daughter to the way he walked through the hospital corridors. His refusal to heal became a silent companion, always present but never acknowledged. Paragraph 3. There were moments when he recognized the need for healing, but he didn't know how to begin. He didn't know how to sit with his grief without feeling like he was breaking apart. He didn't know how to explain his pain to anyone because he was used to being the one who solved problems, not the one who asked for help. In the medical world, he was the calm in the chaos, the doctor who encouraged families to stay strong, even during terrifying diagnoses. But when it came to his own heart, he had no words, no courage, and no roadmap. This emotional paralysis kept him stuck in a place where healing was not just neglected, it was impossible. Paragraph 4. Healing is important not only for personal well-being, but also for the relationships around us. His daughter, innocent and hurting in her own way, needed a father who could guide her through their shared loss. But because he hadn't confronted his own pain, he couldn't help her navigate hers. Children learn by watching, and although she adored her father, she sensed his emotional walls. She learned to be quiet around him, to tiptoe around his sorrow, and to suppress her own feelings so she wouldn't burden him. The home that once held laughter became a place where two broken hearts lived side by side, each one too afraid to reach for the other. Healing was not just something he owed to himself, it was something he owed to his daughter. Paragraph 5. The absence of healing influenced his professional life as well. Though he remained competent, respected, and dedicated, there was a noticeable shift in the way he interacted with patients. He became more distant, more clinical, less connected. He avoided conversations that touched emotional depths because they reminded him of the pain he refused to confront. He didn't allow himself to feel empathy fully, fearing that if he opened the door even slightly, the flood of his own grief would drown him. This emotional detachment may have helped him function, but it robbed him of the humanity that once made him an exceptional doctor. Healing was the bridge back to compassion, a bridge he had not yet crossed. Paragraph 6. True healing does not mean forgetting or replacing the past. It means learning to carry it differently. It means understanding that losing someone you love does not mean losing your ability to love again. It means accepting that pain is not a weakness but a sign that something precious mattered deeply. For the doctor, healing was the essential step he needed before he could open his heart again, whether to his daughter, to himself, or eventually to someone new. Healing after loss is not about moving on. It is about moving forward. And until he found the courage to begin that journey, he remained trapped in the shadows of his grief, unaware that life still had unexpected moments of light waiting for him. The first time the doctor saw the young nun, he didn't even realize she was a nun at all. She wasn't standing in prayer, nor was she speaking to anyone with formal authority. Instead, she was kneeling on the hospital garden grass, surrounded by crayons and a half-open coloring book. Her veil fluttered gently in the afternoon breeze as she helped a child draw clumsy daisies on a page. It was an ordinary moment, small and almost unnoticeable, yet it carried a simplicity, a softness that immediately stood out in the harsh, sterile world of the hospital. She wasn't rushing from room to room, nor did she carry the heaviness of someone performing a duty. She was just present, fully and joyfully present, and somehow that alone made her noticeable. The doctor paused, not because he wanted to, but because something about that peaceful scene seemed foreign to the life he had been living. Paragraph 2. His daughter was beside her, giggling, a sound he hadn't heard in what felt like ages. The laugh hit him like a warm shock, as though time had slowed just enough for him to absorb how unfamiliar it had become. And the source of that laughter, the nun who was drawing uneven stick figures and pretending they were masterpieces worthy of a museum. She tilted her head, lifted her eyebrows dramatically, and acted as though each silly drawing was a grand revelation. She wasn't performing kindness, she was living it. There was no calculation, no pressure, no pity. She had an ease about her, a natural gentleness that made children feel safe and adults feel seen. The doctor stood there, unable to look away, not from the nun, not from his daughter, and not from the rare moment of joy unfolding before him. Paragraph 3. What struck him most was her ability to create warmth in a place designed for emergencies and suffering. Most people who entered the hospital carried some form of anxiety, patients fearing diagnoses, families waiting for updates, doctors overwhelmed by endless responsibilities. Yet this young nun seemed untouched by the heaviness. She moved with a calmness that didn't deny the pain around her, but rather embraced it with compassion. She made the world around her softer simply by existing in it. Her presence reminded him of something he had long forgotten. Kindness can be powerful even when it is quiet. He found himself lingering, curious despite himself, drawn by a feeling he didn't yet understand. Paragraph 4. Her posture, her expression, and the sincerity in her eyes told a story of someone who had chosen service not out of obligation, but out of genuine love for humanity. When she noticed him watching, she offered a small, sincere smile, not overly bright, not forced, but gentle, acknowledging, and respectful. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't an attempt to impress him. It was simply an act of human connection, one that felt almost intrusive to a man who had spent so long isolating himself emotionally. For the doctor, that moment was strangely disarming. He wasn't used to being seen, not truly seen, without being judged or pitied. Her smile felt like an invitation to breathe, something he had forgotten how to do without the weight of sorrow pressing down on him. Paragraph 5. The young nun's entrance into his life was not dramatic. There was no grand event, no sudden spark, no fate-driven coincidence. It was quiet and humble, just like she was. But sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that make the deepest impact. The doctor didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't know why she had chosen this life or what had brought her to this hospital. All he knew was that she carried an atmosphere of peace that he had not experienced in years. She represented something he had lost: hope, warmth, and the reminder that not everything in life was meant to be endured. Some things were meant to be felt. Paragraph 6. In that moment, watching her with his daughter, the doctor felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for the happiness she gave his child, discomfort at the emotions stirring inside him, and curiosity about the person who could create so much light without even trying. He didn't approach her that first day. He simply observed quietly from a distance, but something shifted inside him, subtly yet undeniably. Her entrance into his life was like the first soft knock on a door he had sworn never to open again. And though he didn't realize it then, the presence of this young nun would become the first step in awakening a heart he thought was beyond repair. For a long time after losing her mother, the doctor's daughter lived quietly inside her own world. She was a child who understood far more than anyone realized, not through explanations, but through the silence that filled her home. She knew her father loved her, but she also felt his distance. He moved gently around her, as though afraid she might break if he touched her heart too deeply. So she learned to mirror him. She began hiding her own sadness, her confusion, her longing for the warmth that once filled their home. She played alone, laughed rarely, and held on to stuffed toys as substitutes for a mother's embrace. She missed the way her mother used to braid her hair, and the way her father once lifted her high with pride and joy. But most of all, she missed the feeling of being surrounded by love instead of careful, quiet caution. The little girl was grieving, too, just in the soft, unspoken way children often do. Paragraph 2. When the young nun entered her life, it was as though someone had quietly switched on a light in a dim room. The child didn't understand the nun's vows, her role, or her background. All she understood was the feeling she brought, the feeling of being seen, appreciated, and understood. The nun didn't talk to her like she was fragile. She didn't treat her like a responsibility or a burden. Instead, she treated her like a child deserves to be treated, with joy, attention, and genuine affection. She sat on the ground with her, matched her energy, and gave her the kind of presence children crave, one that is focused, patient, and warm. For the first time in a long time, the daughter felt safe enough to laugh freely, without fear of causing emotional pain to her father. Paragraph 3. Children sense sincerity far more easily than adults do, and the little girl sensed purity in the young nun. She wasn't pretending to care, she truly did. When the nun helped her draw flowers or taught her how to fold paper into tiny boats, she wasn't just entertaining her, she was giving her something deeper, emotional nourishment, and the daughter responded instinctively. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes brightened. She began to talk more, share more, and open up in ways she hadn't in months. She learned to trust again, not because someone demanded it, but because someone earned it. That kind of innocent, instinctive bond is rare, and the doctor noticed it immediately, even if he didn't fully understand it at first. Paragraph 4. The daughter's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was slow, gentle, and natural, much like the presence of the nun herself. At home, the girl began to hum again, the same way her mother once did. She brought home drawings and proudly placed them on the refrigerator, expecting them to be admired. She asked her father questions at dinner, eager to share stories from her day. Though he often responded with minimal words, she continued trying, because for the first time in a long while, she felt inspired to live boldly again. And subconsciously, she wanted her father to feel that same light she felt. Her growing happiness became a quiet invitation for him to step out of the darkness he had trapped himself in. Paragraph 5. What the daughter received from the young nun was not merely companionship. It was emotional healing. The nun helped mend parts of her heart that her father, despite his love, couldn't reach while he was drowning in his own pain. The girl experienced what psychologists often describe. Children heal best in the presence of consistent empathy. The nun listened to her, engaged with her imagination, and acknowledged her feelings. She didn't try to replace the child's mother. Instead, she offered stability, something the little girl had been missing desperately. And in return, the girl flourished. She began to shine again, her personality blossoming like a flower receiving sunlight after a long winter. Paragraph 6. The young nun's impact on the daughter became one of the first undeniable signs that life was shifting in a new direction. The girl's laughter filled the hospital garden, echoing in ways that softened even the hardest corners of her father's heart. Her happiness was a mirror reflecting the possibility that joy could still exist, even after devastation. The doctor saw his daughter returning to the world with open arms, ready to feel again. And as he watched her lean affectionately against the nun, trusting her without fear, he felt something shift inside him. The nun hadn't just touched his daughter's life, she had woken something in him as well. Through his child's smile, He realized that healing was not only possible, it had already begun. The doctor's transformation did not arrive suddenly, nor did it come with dramatic revelations. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the slow thawing of ice after a long winter. At first, he didn't even notice the shift within himself. He continued to work the same long hours, kept the same distance from people, and performed his responsibilities with the same mechanical precision. But something had changed in the spaces between these routines, something subtle yet powerful. It started with small moments, when he caught himself lingering near the hospital garden, or when he listened just a little longer to his daughter's stories. The walls he had built around his heart for years did not crumble. They softened. And sometimes, softening is the first sign that a heart is learning to beat again. Paragraph 2. The young nun played a quiet but undeniable role in this transformation. She never pushed him, never asked personal questions, and never tried to force her way into his emotional world. Her presence alone created a gentle sense of contrast between the heaviness he carried and the lightness she brought into every room she entered. Whenever he watched her interact with patients, nurses, or children, he noticed something remarkable. She gave people more than attention. She gave them genuine presence. He couldn't remember the last time he had offered someone that kind of presence, not even his daughter. This realization struck him deeper than he expected. It stirred something long dormant inside him, admiration blended with longing not for romance, but for the ability to feel again. Paragraph 3. Slowly, he found himself drawn into conversations he once avoided. It began with simple greetings, awkward at first, a nod, a good morning, a brief comment about the weather or a patient's progress. The nun's responses were always warm, always patient, and always sincere. She never treated him like a man who needed fixing, nor did she approach him with pity. Instead, she treated him like a human being, one who deserved kindness even when he didn't know how to accept it. Their interactions were brief and gentle, but each one chipped away at the emotional armor he had held onto for so long. He found himself thinking about her words after she left, noticing how her perspective often contrasted with his own guarded outlook on life. Paragraph 4. As the days passed, his behaviors began to change in ways even he couldn't deny. He started coming home earlier, not because he forced himself to, but because he wanted to. He began listening to his daughter more closely, noticing her excitement instead of just acknowledging it. He even smiled more, though the smiles were small and hesitant. What surprised him most were the emotions inside him, no longer numb, no longer buried under grief. He felt gratitude, curiosity, a bit of confusion, and even a strange sense of relief. He realized that for years he had been moving through life as though he were made of glass, solid on the outside but dangerously fragile within. Yet now, with the gentle influence of this young nun and the growing joy of his daughter, he felt something new, grounded. Paragraph 5. One of the most significant shifts came the evening he found himself watching the sunset from the hospital garden, a place he had once avoided because it reminded him too much of what he had lost. That evening, as the sky shifted from gold to deep orange, he realized he wasn't thinking about his grief. He wasn't reliving painful memories or drowning in what-ifs. Instead, he was simply present, watching the colors change, feeling the cool breeze, and letting himself exist in the moment without guilt or fear. This presence was something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was something close, something gentle. It was healing. Paragraph 6. The doctor's transformation was not a straight path. There were days he retreated into old habits, days grief pulled him backward, and days he questioned whether he deserved this new chapter unfolding before him. But each time he watched his daughter laugh with the nun, or each time he found comfort in the quiet moments they shared, he felt a quiet pull toward life again. He began to understand that transformation isn't about forgetting the past, it's about allowing the heart to expand beyond it. And slowly, steadily, inevitably, He found himself stepping into a version of life he never thought he would experience again. Not because he sought it, but because life, in its gentle and unexpected way, refused to give up on him. The doctor had spent so long believing that loving again would mean betraying the memory of his late wife. For years, he lived with the quiet guilt of survival, a guilt that whispered to him that moving forward was the same as moving on, and moving on meant forgetting. But slowly, as life began shifting around him, he learned a truth he had never been taught. Real love does not erase what came before it. It expands, it creates space. It honors the past while embracing the future. The young nun did not walk into his life as a replacement for someone he had lost. She arrived as a reminder that healing is possible even in the aftermath of heartbreak. She represented the idea that love could exist alongside grief, not in competition with it. Her presence was gentle, unthreatening, and exactly what his wounded heart needed. Paragraph 2. He began to understand that love, when it is genuine, does not demand comparison. The love he once shared with his wife was sacred, built on history, partnership, and years of shared dreams. The emotions he felt now, fusing, fragile, and new, were not meant to compete with that. They were different, softer, like the first tender green sprout emerging after a long winter. He realized that holding onto the memory of his wife did not mean he had to imprison his heart forever. Memories could be cherished without being chains. His past love shaped him into the man he was, but it didn't have to define every chapter of his future. Slowly, he gave himself permission to feel something besides sorrow, and that permission was the beginning of his emotional rebirth. Paragraph 3. The young nun's kindness played a significant role in his understanding of healing. She never tried to step into the role of his late wife. She never tried to take her place in his daughter's life. She never acted as though she was filling a void or fixing something broken. Instead, she respected the sacredness of the grief he carried. She listened without judgment, offered warmth without expectation, and created a sense of safety that allowed him to unfold parts of himself he had kept hidden for years. In her presence, he didn't feel pressured to let go of the past, only to gently acknowledge it and gradually make room for something new. Love, as she embodied it, was not a replacement. It was a bridge forward. Paragraph 4. The more he watched her interact with his daughter, the more he realized how healing works, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of care. The nun never tried to take over the role of mother. Yet she naturally brought back into his daughter's life something that had been missing: warmth. His little girl began to bloom again, not because someone had replaced what she lost, but because someone had given her the permission to feel joy without guilt. And as he watched this transformation, he understood that love doesn't wipe away pain. Instead, it sits beside it. It supports it. It lifts the heart gently enough that it can breathe again. His daughter's healing mirrored his own, slow, delicate, and rooted in the understanding that love is not about filling shoes. It is about filling hearts. Paragraph 5. There were moments when he questioned himself, wondering whether he deserved a second chance at emotional connection. He struggled with fear of losing again, fear of hurting someone else, fear of opening himself only to break anew. But each time those fears overwhelmed him, he found comfort in the nun's steady presence. She lived with vows of compassion, humility, and service, not romantic attachment. The connection forming between them was not about possession or obligation. It was about two human beings crossing paths at a moment when both needed something the other naturally offered. Her kindness softened his sorrow. His vulnerability deepened her empathy. Together, they created a quiet space where growth could happen without pressure or expectation. And that space became the soil for healing, not replacement. Paragraph 6. In time, the doctor learned to see love in a new light, not as something that threatens the memory of what was lost, but as something that honors it by allowing the heart to continue living. He realized that love does not subtract, it multiplies. It builds upon the foundations of past experiences, weaving them into the fabric of new emotions. What he felt for the young nun was not a rewriting of his story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped by healing, gratitude, and the gentle reminder that the heart, even when broken, is capable of blooming again. And for the first time in years, he embraced this truth without fear. In the quiet stillness of an early evening, the doctor watched as his daughter ran across the garden, her laughter echoing like a melody he once thought he would never hear again. Beside her walked the young nun, calm and radiant in her gentle simplicity. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the scene that life had placed before him, a child rediscovering joy, a woman living kindness with every breath, and himself, no longer a man drowning in sorrow, but one learning to breathe again. He realized then that healing had not come to him all at once. It had come in small moments, in quiet gestures, and in the soft presence of someone who entered his life without intention, without expectation. The young nun had never tried to fix him, yet she had helped him become whole. She had never tried to replace what he lost, yet she had helped him see what he still had. Love had returned to him not as a thunderstorm, but as a warm evening breeze. Gentle, unhurried, patient, as his daughter reached him and wrapped her small arms around his waist, he looked back at the nun. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. In that gaze, there was no promise, no confession, and no breaking of vows. Only understanding, a soft, unspoken truth, that some connections exist not to possess, but to heal. And in that moment, he finally understood what life had been trying to show him all along. Love does not ask us to forget. It teaches us how to live again. With a quiet breath and a heart finally free from the weight of the past, the doctor took his daughter's hand and stepped forward, not into a perfect future, but into a hopeful one. A future where pain and healing could coexist. A future where joy did not erase grief but grew from it. A future shaped not by fear, but by the courage to open his heart once more. And for the first time in years, he whispered to himself a truth he finally believed. Life had not taken everything from him. It had simply been waiting to give something back.